My name is still Jessica Lichy. I still work at EDRAC Business School in France, and I've been part of the Academy of Marketing since 2010 when I went to present my PhD research and found out that doing research is not just about doing the PhD, it's a lot more. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Some ways in which we can make our research more relevant and pertinent to what's happening around us in business and society today. So many thanks again to the Academy of Marketing, who entrusted me as a strand lead for marketing education. It's thanks to them that this workshop is able to take place today. So with engaged scholarship and impactful research, the focus is essentially on how we can move out of our silo and make our research more relevant to what's happening around us in business and society. So engaged scholarship, it would gain you a lot of points in a Scrabble board. And what does it mean? Literally, it's about boundary spanning. So we've got 5 blocks there, which frames what we mean by engaged scholarship. So in the top block, it's bridging the divide between what we do and what we know. It's also about recognizing the pluralistic organizations in which we work. So those types of organizations, typically universities and hospitals, where we have a number of different stakeholders. That's the 3rd box. So each person comes with their human capital, their social capital, but in particular, this does give rise to tension. There's competing interests. Everybody in their corner is an expert in their field, and that can lead to clashes sometimes when the marketers are in the same room as the financiers, and we don't both see the world in the same way necessarily. So a lot of our work is about bringing together different perspectives, reading a situation from different points of view to try and solve complex problems. And today the problems are getting more and more complex. Change is the only constant, and change is happening faster and faster. The problems we have today are not going to go away. We need to really face up to them and try and pool together our resources to try and put forward some constructive solutions to what's gone wrong. Last but not least, if we're talking about engaged scholarship, this is recognizing that education is fundamentally a moral endeavor. So, of course, quality education is goal number 4 for the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're very lucky to live in a part of the world where we do have access to quality education. But we need to bear in mind that that's not a generic approach to education today worldwide. So for those of you who'd like to find out a bit more about definitions and how we frame engaged scholarship, the reference at the bottom, Van der Ven, is often cited as one of the best places to start reading around this topic. So knowledge for theory and practice. So that's from the Academy of Management Review. Once again, I'm saying this on a daily basis. I cannot stress enough the importance of adding your sources to each slide. It shows credibility. It shows that you've thought about different perspectives of your research. It shows that you can back up your ideas with something that's been scientifically tested and published in a top-tier journal. So that's engaged scholarship. And then this Venn diagram will bring it together as a visual. It's that we are in the middle. We should be aiming to be in the middle, co-produced knowledge, not sitting on the left in our academic silo, and not entirely on the right-hand side practice-based, but in the middle, where we reflect constantly as a loop. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What impact does it have? How do we improve what's happening around us in terms of resolving the problems that we've been talking about on the previous slide? So once again, we can summarize that in terms of the heading, focusing on producing knowledge, not just published. So I know all of us are complaining this week at the conference about having to write our research in such a way that it pleases the editor so we can get published, so our institutions can go up in the ranking by using the stars that we get from our publications. Yes, but we also have to publish in such a way that we are carrying ideas forward, we are enlightening and advancing communities. It's not sterile knowledge, there has to be a purpose. So that's the work of George, 2016, and the loops on the right-hand side. Do please think about how your publications can feed into your research pipeline. Now, I'm not criticizing anybody for their research strategy. This is an observation. We really should be aiming to have a pipeline with publications at various stages of development. So we have 5 or 6, we've got early papers, we've got papers where the literature review's finished, papers where the methodology, we're about to start planning our data collection, papers where we've got the data and we need to start analysing it, and papers that we've just submitted and now we're waiting for reviewer feedback. So it would be counterproductive to have one paper written, submitted, and then sit back. Don't do it. I was advised to do it, and I decided to do my own thing and start 6 papers. And I would suggest that that's more productive because we are an increasing number of people submitting articles today. If you put all your eggs in one basket and try and place that paper into a journal and it doesn't happen, you've got nothing to fall back on. So now we're looking at 2-dimensional research. We need to know what's going on around us, and we need to organise our pipeline in such a way that we have research at different stages. So that's the pipeline. When you are putting together the pipeline, obviously there are different ways in which we can develop our research. Some of you know that I work on digital marketing. Well, this also splits into socio-technical socio-materialism of digital user behaviour, sustainable digital transformation, and then looking at this in different contextual environments. So how does this impact on student entrepreneurs? How does this impact on DEI, diversity, inclusion and equity? So we need to check constantly, where else can I apply my knowledge? Where else is it relevant? How can I take what I've done in this field and apply it in a new context and develop the theory further? And that enables us to supervise a wider number of students with different research interests. If we are putting ourselves in one category of marketing, then we are really limiting the possibilities for co-authoring and international academic collaboration. So whilst you are thinking about how else can I stretch my research into a slightly different field, we need to be keeping an eye on these future avenues for research. What might be happening? Where are we going? Yesterday I was talking about AI and the negative consequences of augmented hypocrisy as a result of AI in brand communication. Well, there is plenty of different directions I could go in for future avenues of research. I haven't decided yet. This is why I rely heavily on the Academy of Marketing, because taking those ideas and presenting it in front of 400 people and talking to people who are members of the Academy of Marketing, you get extremely useful and constructive feedback from people like that. So if you're not already thinking about joining the Academy of Marketing in the UK, I would say just do consider it. Come to the conference in Manchester next July, and I'll be there. So that was our engaged scholarship, and then so we getting involved in new topics, getting involved in different fields of research, and this links into impactful research. How does our research have impact? How can we make our research make a difference, make a positive change to what we're doing? So by trying to see where else is my research relevant, how does it fit into what's going on, this means that we will appeal to a broader audience. You know, marketers are very versatile by the very nature of being in marketing. You know, it's always classed as partly scientific, the plan, structured, program side. But the other half of marketing is the creativity, co-creation, innovation, trying to second guess what customers are going to do. It's anticipating. So by bringing those two sides together, 50-50 marketing thinking, yeah, we can extend our research and be more impactful when we're coordinating with other people, when we are collaborating with different nationalities of people in the same field as us. There's always something to learn from people in the same field as you, coming from a different cultural context. So we need to focus quite heavily on moving the conversation from interesting to actionable. So we know in the English language, when we say something is interesting, it means like, you know, oh, just shut up, I don't want to listen to this anymore. But I really do mean the word interesting in that sense, that interesting of interest. It's not a polite, I don't want to listen to this anymore. But shifting the conversation from, oh, yes, oh, I wonder what that means, to actually moving on to, I want to do something about this. So, you know, the classic example of talking with some people yesterday, if you also are concerned about AI augmented hypocrisy and brand communication, then it's not enough to be interested. You actually have to be actionable and taking action and either disseminating your knowledge or trying to find out more, or maybe Jessica in her little side of Europe has got it wrong. Maybe you do research and you find out from another 4 case studies, different from what I presented yesterday. Maybe you find a different interpretation. So that's what I mean by shifting from interesting, but no thanks, to actionable. Yeah, I'm going to do something about this. I'm not just going to say politely, that's interesting. So we often talk about having to be able to define why we do what we do. And I often say, yeah, we need to understand collectively and individually how we consume in marketing, what makes us consume, not consume, or boycott. So if we are moving our collective attention to an emergent phenomenon, then that is actually giving greater impact to our research. So again, here I hope you can see we're talking about moving away from the descriptive and even beyond the analytical, but what next? Now, what could be emerging that we haven't yet noticed? Maybe something's happening and we just haven't taken time to research carefully how something has changed. It's like culture, which we often talk about in presentations at the moment. Culture changes imperceptibly every decade. It changes so slowly we don't notice it. And of course, everything else changes in relation to the changing culture. And it's culture with an S. Organization culture, culture from a national level, culture from an organizational level, a corporate level. And culture from a digital perspective too. Our digital agency, it's constantly evolving. And we need to focus on what's emerging and how does it impact upon us, and how can our research maintain its impact when everything else is changing. If we are not looking at moving forward and trying to advance our research, then in effect we're going backwards. We're not staying static, we go backwards because everyone else will be moving forward. So one of the exciting bits about marketing and looking at people, how they consume, is this notion of addressing phenomenon where society does not yet have an intuition. We don't yet really know what's going on. We have a vague idea of what's happening with AI, like 20 years ago when we had a vague idea of what's happening with the introduction of Web 2.0. But we don't really know for sure. So at this stage, our research can help by delivering an academic, informed opinion, which will help people to try and grasp some of the changes taking place. So yeah, grand challenges. We live in a world full of grand challenges today, especially geopolitically. Again, our research can help formulate ideas, help explain complex situations, help give another view to what the media is telling us what to believe. Now, today's society, we don't look for information, we wait for the news to find us. A large proportion of my students will get news from social media, Instagram and TikTok. I said, don't you think you should be looking at a major media organization to get a bit more of a balance rather than relying on TikTok for your global news updates? No. So this is quite a concern for me as a researcher and a parent, that the younger generations are relying on information finding them rather than taking the initiative to go and find the information. That for me is a grand challenge. the way in which we are fed ideas, the media tells us what to think. And it's up to us to face some of these challenges. There are numerous challenges, but information and communication is one of my pet hobby horses. So requiring follow-up effort means it's not a one-off. It's a constant circle, a loop of making sure your research is keeping up to date, it's relevant, and it's moving forward in a way that has a purpose, that relevance and pertinence to what's going around us. So you have a reference at the bottom if you'd like to look more at this, celebrating impact, striving for more. And it's all about literally knowing what we're doing and why we're doing it, and trying to explain our work. Explaining the work is very difficult. I used to say, yeah, I'm working on digital marketing at the moment. They get that blank look on people's face. Okay, yeah. What does that mean? So we have to be able to explain our research as an elevator pitch in 2 minutes. What are you doing? So now it's making our research relevant to make people understand what I'm doing. I just say, yeah, I'm looking at the negative impact of digital transformation from a user perspective. Blank. Okay. I'm looking at internet addiction. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Cyberbullying, yeah. So we have to sometimes disseminate our research ideas in a way that the general public can actually understand. I think that's quite difficult for us to shift. We are so focused on writing with a very dry academic tone that when we go and see Joe Public, as we say, Joe Public doesn't speak like that, and it's important that we can express our ideas. So the visual that I chose to sum up this slide is the Winchester Mystery House, which some of you might have seen before. It's a folly, as we say in the English language. This is a house built that has a staircase that goes to a wall. It has doors that go nowhere. It was just built on a pure madness plan of architecture. And sometimes to people who don't speak the same language as us, the same academic language as us, our work can look like this, a house that has no windows, no doors, staircases that go in the wrong direction. And this is the work of Davis, who says, yeah, management scholarship, it's come to resemble the Winchester Mystery House. It's bizarre structure, unending and unnecessary additions. This is the bungalow, and I want to put a castle on top of the chimney because I can. Disconnected from the environment and lacking in practical utility. To some people, that's what our work sounds like. Gobbledygook. To some people, they just think we sit in front of a computer all day and drink coffee and talk to people on social media. Yeah, we do that. But we also try and further knowledge. We try and make our knowledge and our research relevant to what's happening around us, to try and explain some of the inconsistencies and incoherences that are taking place. A classic example, during the pandemic, we were told, do not panic buy. And we all went to the supermarket and saw toilet roll gone. Rice gone, pasta gone. This bulk buying, this is one of the big problems that we see. We were told not to do it, and we did exactly the opposite. And then you could really question, okay, so what have we done to try and understand that phenomenon? Have we learned anything from it? What have we learned from the pandemic? You could write it on a postcard. Most of the special issues which were focusing on the pandemic, COVID-19, and how we changed during the lockdown period, they've finished now. If you still have work not published which concerns the pandemic era, get it out there, get it off your desk as quickly as possible. I work on 3 journals as an assistant editor. We don't want any more papers with the word COVID-19 or pandemic unless you're doing a longitudinal study and you can show how a situation has gone from acute to chronic. Do you get that? If you can use the pandemic as a starting point and show 5 years later, where are we now? How have we changed? What made us change in this way? Then you have relevant research with impact, and it's engaged scholarship. But do not underline in red with stars around it, send any more papers with the words COVID-19 or pandemic or lockdown, because we don't want them. We're not publishing them. If you think how long it takes for a paper to be reviewed, 18 months. Even for one of the low-ranked journals, it's now 186 days from submission to acceptance minimum. So can you imagine how long that will take if you submit a paper with pandemic in it? It's going to be another 2 years before it's in print. So that, you know, is woefully out of date. Then your research has very little relevance. And students will say to you, why did you publish this? The pandemic was a decade ago. You're still trying to milk it for something. So if you do have pandemic stuff, okay, you can fix it by doing a longitudinal study, but don't send anything in with just pandemic, because it will be a desk reject. You've been warned. So our work needs to bridge. We need to see how our work fits in with what's happening, how can fit into this new trend, the emerging trend of lifelong learning. And for those of you who haven't already done it, I would advise you to get involved with executive MBAs or executive DBAs. So it's slightly less classical than full-time education in higher education institutions. If you're working with executive, these are generally people who are senior management or director roles, and they're back in school because they would like to have a qualification in order to take on a new role within the organization or for a promotion. So these people bring a lot of interesting ideas to the classroom. These people will bring cutting-edge, real corporate case studies. And they do lack the academic underpinning, for sure. And that's where you can come in and say, well, you know, this is a problem. Of course it is. Let's say rising turnover of staff. And you know, well, let's look at this from an academic point of view. Why do you think people are leaving? Why do you think morale is low? Don't just tell me you have low morale at work. Now, trying to work out why. Is it because somebody has introduced a new digital platform and nobody can use it? And they are fed up of trying to update and upskill their digital competencies and be faced with constantly changing technology. So you've got to look at the problem from an academic perspective. And when you're working with executives, MBA and DBA, it brings on a very interesting dimension to our research. So one of the recent student pieces of work which I supervised in terms of executive DBA was somebody who works for a large European supermarket discounter who employs people from various European countries. And it was noticed that some countries rose up the corporate ladder quicker than other nationalities from the host country. So that was a really interesting piece of work, because we don't often see textbooks on that topic. We're bringing in here the management side of it, there was a marketing retail side of it, there was a human resource management side of it, and a digital side of it. So that's one of the big advantages of getting involved with executive supervision. You get to see a lot more about your research in a different frame. And the second bullet point is particularly relevant to us. Most of the jobs of 2030 don't exist. It's very difficult for us to impart knowledge today in a pertinent way that's going to help tomorrow's job market. We don't know. We were talking the other day about corporations, local enterprises here, who were observing that we don't necessarily do the right training for our students in terms of giving them soft skills. Maybe we don't. Have we ever sat down and thought, oh, how can I help my students negotiate better, communicate better, improve their information flow? Now, do we ever really sit down and think, now, how can I help my student learn more effectively? Or is it more about, let's get through the syllabus. Let's get through the syllabus so that everybody's got all the information ready for the exam. And after the exam, now we forget what we did yesterday. So sometimes it's useful to stand back and think, okay, am I helping my students to think outside the box? Which is extremely important in the era of ChatGPT. Now I say to my students, stop using it. You know, I'm going to evaluate your work based on you drawing a diagram. by hand with a pencil and a piece of paper. And I want you to put down on this piece of paper your customer journey and why you're not sustainable. That's just an example. I was like, oh, can I do this with my computer? No. Because one day you'll be in a situation and your manager will say, hey you, what should we do about this morale problem? Can I just ask ChatGPT? No. So you need, this is why I say to students, you need to be able to answer questions standing on your own 2 feet without relying on AI to give you the answer. Now you might want to put your work into AI and say, what's wrong with my work? How can I improve it? But again, if you're doing that, you need to, as I say to my students, you need to tell what was the prompt, what was the information given, how did I modify it? So I think one of our new roles, which was never in our job description when we agreed to do this job, one of our new roles today is helping our students understand where and how to use AI intelligently without losing the ability to think rationally and to make clear decisions in our marketing problem solving. So our research has to be oriented towards this research-based inquiries. Now, how do we try and make our work relevant to the new needs of organizations? So we've had this problem for about a quarter of a century. We have the baby boomers who like telephones, Generation X who like email, Generation Y, social media, Gen Z, they're just doing all sorts of things. And in 2 years' time, we have Gen Alpha. Good luck. Gen Alpha, for those of you who have young children or younger siblings, you know that Gen Alpha is nothing like Gen Z. We are just not ready for it. So we know Gen Alpha is coming. We are still seeing research papers get ready for Gen Z. No, actually in 2 years they're out. It's the next generation we should be looking at. So that's what I mean when I was saying like the new needs of organization. We're now going to have 5 generations in the workforce in the next 2 years. And when we've got baby boomers, they still want to talk to you on the phone in person, and Gen Alpha coming in with completely different technological needs and abilities. That's a recipe for disaster. So understanding and learning how to cope with these digital differences and our reliance on different digital generations of digital innovation, that's going to be one of the new skills, I think, that we have to help our students understand. Now, some of the younger students, they think everybody is tech savvy, and we're not. No, it's like many of us are using less than 1% of the internet, and that's not just an age thing. It's, you know, we're a bit lazy as well. We like to stay in our digital comfort zone. We don't want to learn too much too soon, unless we have to. So some of the ways in which I've been trying to bridge the gap between my research and reality. With Vincent on the left-hand picture, we are looking at the impact of global warming on the ski industry. So that's alpine skiing, not water skiing. That was a different paper. So this picture on the left is actually a resort where I go regularly. And the difference is just 10 years. It's the same date 10 years later. So you can see that we will be hosting the Olympics in the French Alps in 2030. We're going to be facing grass skiing or mud skiing. And even today, for the past 4 years, over 40% of snow production is artificial snow production. We can only expect the temperatures to get higher between now and 2030. So I don't know how we're going to manage with the Olympics coming in 2030. I really don't. There was on Facebook this morning, I sent it to Vincent, there's somebody collecting chairlifts, and there's going to be a museum of ski chairlifts and cable cars coming up soon, because we won't be using them anymore. That'll be like collecting horse-drawn carriages very soon. So if you're looking for investing in the future, maybe cable cars and unused chairlifts might be an item that you would like to collect. And on the right-hand side, this is some research I'm doing in South Africa and in Azerbaijan on sustainable wine production. Now, there's a New World wine versus Old World wine. And you know, the French are quite snobby about their wine, and they think they're the best winemakers. But the temperature is rising, and so when I first moved to France 24 years ago, our local wine, Côte du Rhône, it was 11.5%, 12% alcohol. Today it's 14.5%. That's almost classing it as a port or a fortified wine. So the sugar level has gone up as the temperature's rising, and now French wine producers are buying disused farms in the UK because the temperature is a lot lower. The plants in the south of England in the horticultural gardens are being moved to the top of Scotland. It's just not tenable to be able to cultivate certain strains of grapes and certain plants in such extreme conditions. So again, we know global warming is happening, whether we're looking at the problem from the perspective of skiing or from the perspective of sustainable wine. There's multiple ways of trying to make our research relevant to what's happening around us. Yeah, we could also look at the problem from another way and say, okay, how do we raise awareness of global warming? How do we actually make people take interest in changing their unsustainable behavior? How do we actually raise the alarm and make people stop and think what they're doing? But we can start with the pictures. You know, a picture tells a 1,000-word story. So by constantly this iterative loop, we can, between practice and theory, we can make our research more relevant. So these are just two industries which are of interest to me as a marketer, but there are multiple ways of actually focusing on these problems around us. Global warming is a good starting point, and we can interpret that from many different ways. We can't solve the problem of global warming. That's, although it says solve problems, but we can take a step towards limiting the damage that we're causing. We can also generate broader insights into the processes taking place, and we understand the problem from a new perspective and share clearly. This is all about disseminating our research. We shouldn't be aiming to do research just for ourselves. Now, our research should not be on a bookshelf. I was talking to somebody yesterday about some British researchers who had done a research paper on the sweatshops in the Italian luxury industry around Milan, and how some of the workers hadn't been paid, they were underpaid, they were overworked in terrible conditions. And that piece of work was picked up by a national newspaper. Now that's what we all should be aiming towards, getting our research into a national newspaper, because more people read newspapers than scientific journals. So look out for opportunities where you can disseminate your research to a wider audience. And on this slide about chairs and SIGs and how to make your research more engaged and more impactful, do join a SIG, a special interest group, where you are connecting with people in your field. So not just marketers, but consumer behavior, responsible consumer behavior, socially oriented decision making within a SIG. So there's SIGs for education, there's SIGs for management perspectives, there's SIGs for multiple interpretations of our subject. Also try and get involved in the chair. So this is when a university will dedicate resources, time, people, money, to focusing on one research paradigm. And two examples here: entrepreneurship and disabilities. We have a chair at EDRAC which focuses purely on people with disabilities who want to be entrepreneurs and the difficulties they face, how they overcome the challenges. And it's an incredibly interesting field. So this is not necessarily marketing, but it doesn't prevent us from getting involved with this type of research. And regenerative. So if you're not familiar with regenerative business models, this is beyond sustainability. So in terms of sustainability, someone asked me to define this last Friday. Sustainability, the simple definition, using resources today in such a way that doesn't damage resources of future generations. Regenerative is one step beyond that notion of sustainability. So it's not just stopping the damage, it's restoring and revamping. So in the example of the ski resorts, we're not just stopping those chairlifts going up and down for 9 hours a day, wasting electricity when no one's using them. This is removing the skiing and replacing it with something which is going to generate income, benefit a wider community. So some of the efforts that we've been testing in the French Alps recently, in recent winters, is things like cold water spa treatment, standing in a cold river for 3 seconds. Things like nature walks, mountain biking, hiking. So different activities that you can do in the mountain, but you're not relying on energy to get up the mountain. You're actually making that step yourself. So mountain communities have been extremely damaged by us selfish skiers. And it's time to think, okay, it's not sustainable. If we stop it, we've got to replace it with something. And that switch is particularly controversial at the moment because we'll be hosting the Olympics. It's, I think we'll have to wait for the Olympics to finish before we can seriously move forward on this project. So do join a SIG. I do obviously draw your attention towards the marketing education SIG, because I think that's one of the more pertinent to our work type SIGs, where we are in contact with people who connect with those ideas, and we can help inform younger people in a constructive way. Another example of a SIG, also part of the Academy of Management, is management consulting. So the Academy of Management, the Academy of Marketing, they are two very different fields. However, there is a crossover, and you can be in, for example, the education SIG in both, and it will be two different perspectives of education. So it's well worth having a look at different academies that you can join. Other ways in which you can disseminate and bridge your work to a more practical perspective is to get involved with journals. Every year the editorial board will ask, does any new members, can anyone recommend new members who want to join? So with JMD on the left, Journal of Management Development, some people leave because they've worked with a journal for a number of years and they want to go for a different journal. I've been with the JMD for a long time, and every time I think, oh, maybe I should move on to a different journal, there's always a reason not to do it. And one of the main reasons is the editor-in-chief often changes. I say often changes. Since I've been with JMD, the editor-in-chief has changed maybe 4 or 5 times. And with each new editor, the journal takes on a new focus. So you don't have time to get stale. There's always something new happening. The International Journal of Organizational Analysis, they will be, in the next few months, we'll be having another board meeting. It's likely that the journal will be asking for new assistant editors. So if you are interested in becoming part of the editorial board, first of all, you need to have published in this journal. You need to be familiar with the aims and the scopes of the journal. Join the conversation. That's what we always say. Join the conversation. Know what the journal's about. Because sometimes the title doesn't actually give you a good interpretation of what the journal publishes. JMD on the left. Now we've moved into sustainability and digital, but nowhere in the title does that say that. We can't change the title of the journal, but we can update and extend and modify the aims and the scopes. So the Canadian Journal of Administrative Sciences, so this is Francophone and Anglophone. This is another journal I work with, and Gabor is putting together with Veronica, who was here and has gone. She was here. And then she left again. So we're putting together a special issue on social media influencers. So it's under consideration. We've had the green light. It's not in print yet. But if you do have research which is on the topic of social media influencers, and of course de-influencers, that's something that Generation Alpha have brought us, de-influencers. Because they don't want to do things in the same way as Gen Z. They wouldn't be seen dead doing the same as Gen Z. So that's what our special issue will be about. I think we're aiming to go live January, and then it will be open for about 9 or 10 months. So you've got time to think about how you could disseminate your research in terms of special issues. Like we've said before, special issues are sometimes more straightforward to get your first few publications because it's a very specific focus. And once you've done several publications in a journal, you can propose a special issue to an editor. It's that easy. That's all you have to do. You get yourself published at least twice and say, okay, I've joined the conversation. I know what people are writing about. I know what's happening. I know how my research has impact. I know how to demonstrate engaged scholarship. And now I want to do a special issue because we need to focus on these points. And most editors will say, okay, could you give me a bit more detail about this? Could you tone down that? Can you build up this bit? And it's not as daunting as it sounds. It's a bit more work, which you don't get paid for. But being a guest editor of a special issue, it enables you to connect with a lot of people. And that's how I met Gabor. He submitted a paper to my special issue. Like, oh, you're on the same field as me. That's how I met Vincent. Oh, you're doing the paper the same as me. So doing special issues and getting published in a special issue is also another way we can bridge that gap between our research and its relevance, really. So that's one way in which you can get yourself more connected through publishing in journals. But and I know I've said this before, I cannot emphasize it enough, do work out how your research can foster interdisciplinary focus. Now, don't stay in your silo. See where your work connects with other parallel fields of research. So I'm not asking you to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. I'm saying do think about how, although we said many conferences no longer want people to use TAM or the theory of planned behaviour or UTOs, yet there are conferences who say that. There are session chairs who say this is just well out of date. I don't want any presentations on this. Okay, but if you present it, package it in a different way and say, but actually I'm looking at it from a different cultural context, the global south, for example. I'm looking at it from the perspective of the bifurcation of the internet, the Chinese internet versus GAFAM internet. Then you're having a different perspective. Same for generational segmentation. Yeah, it's old, but no one criticizes it in the same way that we criticize TAM. No, the generation logic, Mannheim, 1952, but no one criticizes it. Because we just don't know how these 5 generations every century actually appropriate technology in a different way. And the impact that it has in terms of management, leadership, communication, human resource management, etc., etc. And I'm really excited about the box on the right-hand side, the diversity of information and communication technology, how we all use technology in different ways. Very few of us use technology in a way that it was designed to be used, but that's humankind. Ever since the first printing press was made to print the Bible, we didn't use it for that, did we? The workers used it to print pornography. What does that tell you about humankind? It's the same for the internet. The precursor of the internet in France was called the Minitel. It had a very low adoption rate until the online sex chat service was launched. And then suddenly it was very popular. Can't think why. And it didn't show up on the phone bill either. So as human beings, we have a very strange relationship with technology. We don't use it in a way it was designed. There is more illegal traffic online than legal traffic. Now, there's more illegal trade takes place in online environments than offline. So the diversity of usage, the way we engage with technology, how we consume different platforms, it's an immensely fascinating field which connects with the other 3 areas. Now, depending where you are, cultural theories and diversity of usage, there's a direct correlation. If you can't see it, think of the internet like driving a car. We all drive a car, but every country has its own way of driving. Some people respect traffic lights and speed limits and pedestrians. Some cultures don't. Now, you know who I'm talking about. Yeah. So, again, a focus on broadening our scope for trying to supervise DBA students, MBA students, PhD students. Think about how your work can feed into supervising, and if you don't feel comfortable supervising, you can co-supervise. You can nominate yourself as an industry expert, coming in with a particular specialist knowledge. So think about how your research can help in terms of offering supervision. And this doesn't necessarily have to be formal. You can mentor junior colleagues and help them if they want to be mentored. Not everybody wants to be mentored, but you can offer help. Now, I can read your work if you want and do a friendly review for you. Things like that. You're not forcing somebody to give you a weekly report on their status update. So these are some areas where I try and offer my expertise for supervising. And generally, if you show willingness to supervise junior colleagues and younger students of the doctoral school, this often leads to invitations to examine PhDs, either online or offline, in different countries around the world. And that's exciting too, because you see other types of research that people are doing in different geographic contexts. So coming up to the end almost, when we have to explain our research to people either who don't do the same research as us or don't really understand academia, you need to be able to express this and answer this question with your own words, not my words. What's the thread that shapes your research strategy? Be able to answer that question. That's very important. So now do think about what theories are we expected to use. No, there are certain journals which expect you to use certain theories, and you might not like Hofstede's cultural dimensions, but you do nevertheless need to clearly state, okay, this is what's been published, this is why it may have less relevance today than it did 40 years ago, this is what I suggest to complement and update what was published in 1980, for example. And that's why the second bullet point is relevant. We need to focus on drawing attention to the changes taking place in our user behavior, our digital user behavior. Why and what's the long-term impact of our user behavior, our digital agency. So again, this contextual question, how does this change in different contexts? And sometimes it's very difficult to put your point across when you're talking to somebody from a different context. So we all know that there's a north-south divide in the way that we consume digital platforms. But explaining the north-south divide to somebody who lives in Scandinavian or Nordic countries can seem quite a difficult task, because for them they might think, well, everybody uses the internet like we do. No, I live in the block of the world called France and the Pigs, Portugal, Italy, Greece and Spain. We are the Latin Mediterranean cultures, and we have a different digital user behavior compared to the north. And getting that across is sometimes quite challenging, because people in the south of Europe, they don't always get immediately what's happening in the north, and vice versa. And east-west, it's the same, but we don't talk about the east-west divide, we just talk about the north-south divide. So when you're in that kind of situation and it's difficult to write it as a research paper, I would say, do a book. A book is free. It's much quicker to write. Cambridge Scholar is the company I use to do books, and you will have handheld care to write the book. They even design the cover for you and give you a choice of 6 different covers. So you just need to put in the 85,000 words, and it's either can be a collection of research papers from a conference, for example, or it could be a book, a monograph that you've written by yourself, or it could be a collection of your top students' work. I did that during lockdown because there was not much else to do. The gym was closed, the ski resorts were closed, and I decided to publish my top 10 students' research papers as a book. And the lastly is a transformation of my habilitation thesis as a book, because there's some ideas that I've put across which are quite controversial. So getting that into a research paper would be a bit tricky, but it's in a book. And so this enables other people to quote from the book these quite radical ideas about the brave new World Wide Web, which was the original title. So other areas in which you could extend your research, do have a look at the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China. There's a lot going on there which we haven't really focused on in any great depth. We are still guided by the North American research paradigm. What happens in North America comes across to Europe, because Europe's just homogenous, isn't it? We don't have a north-south divide. Well, have a look at the BRICS, a completely different way of engaging with digital platforms. MENA is another fascinating context, Middle East, North Africa, to look at in terms of female entrepreneurs and how they face very different challenges from female entrepreneurs in other geographic contexts. Social business, social innovation, that's extremely relevant in terms of limiting the environmental damage that we've caused so far and trying to focus more on our neighbourhoods, our communities, our parish, trying to, like this university is doing, by setting up neighbourhood cafes, restaurants, small cottage industries, involving the people, and everybody is focused on the general improvement of our social context. Another area of research which has been dropping in popularity, because we're now back at work, managing remote and hybrid workers. So 5 years on from the pandemic, this is less topical because most of us have been told to go back to work. Because local businesses are suffering with losing the footfall. And the last area, which I obviously like, because I like those obscure areas, unconventional consumption. You've obviously noticed textbooks are written about average people who have rational consumer behaviour, who do logical decision making. But when you move out of that box, which is quite narrow actually, and you see other ways of consuming, different ways of consuming, unconventional, non-mainstream is another synonym we can use. It's really fascinating. And you might think, what the hell is she talking about? A lot of unconventional consumer behaviour is today mainstream. Tattoos. Traditionally worn by sailors, pirates, criminals, prisoners. Today it's quite fashionable, isn't it? Presidents have tattoos. Sports icons have tattoos. Music heroes have tattoos. So that's an example of how unconventional consumption, body modification, has shifted from unconventional to mainstream. Veganism is the same. In the 1970s, you were pretty odd if you were a vegan. That's now mainstream. And the same for hipsters. That's mainstream again. So we see a lot of unconventional consumption which gradually shifts over to the mainstream. And it's good to focus on it because then you can see what's coming. It's a guessing game. We don't know for sure. One thing we do know is that the shift to mainstream is going quicker and quicker as a result of social media. So that's something we have to factor in. So all of these areas, they're useful for you to read around the topic. Think about how you can bring those ideas into your research. Think about how you could use this knowledge to supervise your doctoral students. And the line across the bottom is something I included on my habilitation slides. It's useful if you can flag up to people how your work is oriented towards supervising students, how it's oriented towards practice, how it's an international dimension, you've got a theme, you've got research going on, and lastly, diversity oriented. So do have a think about how you can not necessarily change your research focus, but how you can better package it so that people understand what you're doing, people can communicate with you and suggest, have you thought about talking to this person, that business, going to this association? That's it. This is Leon. You've got my email. Please do contact me if you are in need of an answer to a question after I've gone, or indeed if you're coming to Lyon. I know one person in the audience is definitely coming. It would be amazing to see you in France. And of course, Vincent in Paris would offer the same invitation too. So you could do Lyon and Paris if you came over to this side. Yeah. That's all, folks.